NumismaTalks every second and fourth Thursday of the month at noon Mountain. We will be here with a new presentation. During this presentation, you may come up with questions, and if you do, please use the Q&A button on your screen to send in your question, and we will address it at the end. Now, I would like to introduce you to today's presenter, Peter Lawrence. Peter spent 35 years managing technology products. Today, he is a small business consultant living in Scottsdale, Arizona. He was born in Portland, Oregon, where his family was in the saddle and holster manufacturing business from 1857 to 1985. He studied business at Oregon State University and then received a master's degree from the Thunderbird School of Global Management in Phoenix, Arizona. Peter is a musician, world traveler, and coin collector. His current focus is a 1963 birth year collection of world coins and commemorative medals. Peter is a veteran public speaker and has delivered hundreds of continuing education presentations to architects, engineers, and technology consultants throughout his career. His sessions are always filled with entertaining stories, colorful anecdotes, and humor. Peter is presenting the heads and tails of birth year collecting, and it's all yours, Peter.
Thank you very much, Paula. I appreciate the introduction, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know many of you are packed up ready to go to Oklahoma City. Sorry, I won't be able to meet you there this year, but I'm glad to have you here today, and I have a fun presentation to share with you. So let me get that screen sharing process started, and we'll pull up our slides. And like Paula said, I'm dialing in from Scottsdale, Arizona. And we had some serious heat this week. It got up to 118 degrees, in fact. So right now it's a little bit better than that. I'm going to switch the display mode here. And hopefully you should all be seeing my slides.
Perfect. I'm going to turn my camera off, but I'll be here if you need me.
Very good. Thanks, Paula. Okay, so, I'm a collector of coins and medals. I was a childhood collector, and I kind of put my collection away. And then when COVID came along, I decided to catalog my collection and narrow it down, sell some things off, and focus on what really meant something to me. And as a kid, I mowed my neighbor's lawn, and he paid me in foreign coins because he was a sea captain. That was a good deal for him, right? But for me, I ended up with a big collection of foreign coins. And so when I started cataloging it, I realized I had a lot from my birth year. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Maybe I could fill in the blanks. And I started to do that with coins. And then I came across all these incredible commemorative medals. And I started to learn what actually took place the year of my birth. And I got fascinated and saw the amazing commemoratives and started filling in those blanks too. So that's how it starts. Maybe some of you have gone through that process as well. But let me dig right into the presentation here. What we're going to cover today, really the first bullet to me is one of the most challenging parts of this whole process is how do you know what countries even existed the year of your birth? We'll get into that in a minute. And then once you really know what countries there were, who minted what, where did they mint them, what denominations were they in, this sort of thing. That's all a really big puzzle, and it's a lot of fun. I found it interesting. If you like puzzles, you'll enjoy that. Understanding what actually happened the year of your birth. Most of us don't remember the years of our birth, so we have to do that research. And I think somebody gave me a Life magazine from the week of my birth once when I was young, and I was really impressed by how different the world was and how many things had changed and what really went on that year. So I found it intriguing, and it's really it's been fun. It's come to fruition with my collection. So we'll get into that as well. Also, parameters, putting parameters on your collection. A lot of us don't like to do that, but it can get out of control really quickly. So it's kind of wise to really focus, or you can really, it can cause you problems with your family, with your budget, with your storage space, this kind of thing. So we'll talk about that as well. I have some resources I want to share for you in trying to find coins and medals that fit your collection requirements. And then I'll take you into my 63 collection. I'll show you some highlights of that. It was a really interesting year politically, and many of you may remember it. And then I have some tips and tricks as well to recommend as you put your collections together. So let's start with how you identify these countries and these mints. So step one, when I got started on this process, I thought, well, how do I find out what countries actually existed? If you're like me in freshman, social studies class, they made us memorize the map of Africa. Well, if you look at the map of Africa today, 9 out of 10 countries have different names and different borders than they did back in high school. So trying to figure that out can be a trick. just doing a Google search doesn't get you accurate information, believe it or not. I found one of the most useful resources for me was that I actually ordered a world map that was printed in 1963, so I could actually see where the borders were, where the countries' names were, and then I supplemented that with online research. And I still found surprises a year or two later that I didn't really realize. So that was a good start, but that's something I would recommend for you as well. If you go to the numismatic websites like ANA, PCGS, NGC, Numista, and any number of sites that actually list coins and medals, and you search your birth year, you're going to find really quickly a whole lot of coins and medals that you may or may not have been aware of, and each one leads you down the path to multiple more, and that gets really interesting. But those are powerful resources that I use every day. I have bookmarks for all of them. One thing that I found was really interesting, especially in Africa and especially in the Caribbean countries, is they change all the time. And what they did in 1963 was very different. During colonial times, we had all these French territories, Portuguese territories, British territories, and so, but those countries started to go independent in the 60s. So what you found is that a lot of them had legacy, monetary systems and legacy. They might have had issued coins in French francs or in, it could have been U.S. dollars, or it could have been Portuguese escudos, whatever it might have been. And then when they started going independent, they started switching things back and minting their own coins and this sort of thing. That's a huge challenge in the Caribbean and Africa. And what I found is that many countries or islands belong to these collectives or cooperatives rather, and they would get together in 10 or 20 different islands and they would form a currency collective, and then they would actually issue a coin with a specific denomination like a French franc, but maybe they had it minted by a private mint in Germany or the United States. You never know. So these are all big rabbit holes that you have to go down. And when you really find out what's what, you realize that it changed by the month in those time periods. So in the early 60s. So it got really, really interesting. You can go to some of the mints and they actually have specimen archives. I've got a screenshot here that you'll see from the Medallic Art Company, Mako Mint. They have wonderful online archives of all the metals that they've minted over the years. And they actually have numbering system for them. In fact, many of these mints have catalog number systems, and they may or may not be publicly available, but you can usually find them. So the large mints actually did that kind of archiving for you, and you can get a hold of it. It gets tricky when you talk about the smaller private mints and categories that don't have numbering systems, catalog systems, that sort of thing. Some of the larger, more popular categories actually have their own books and their own numbering systems and this sort of thing. I found that when collecting Mexican silver rounds is one of my favorite categories. And there was a gentleman named Frank Grove that published 3 different books on Mexican silver. And that's invaluable resource. They're hard to come by because they only printed a few, but that's helpful. And then a number of collectors put together a wonderful series of books on John F. Kennedy medals as well. So those books are super helpful for collections if you're looking for those narrow categories. Now, artificial intelligence, AI, if you have Chat GPT or something like that, that can really help, but it can also really throw you off. Have you ever followed a Google map and it took you the wrong direction? Well, it's the same kind of thing. AI is still collecting known resources and compiling them and then making assumptions about them and feeding you the information. So you can learn some things with AI, but you can also get a lot of false information, misleading information, just really incorrect. So you really, really have to be careful with that. But it can be valuable if you have an AI subscription of some kind to do searches. But you have to add layers and layers and layers. Once it gives you an answer, you have to ask a more refined search question and more detailed, and continue down the path until you finally get what you want. I can help you with that if you're really interested in learning more. Now, how do you find out what really went on? If you're looking at commemorative medals, it's all about what happened the year of your birth. So there are some great resources for that. New York Times is tremendous, Life Magazine, The Atlantic. You have great online resources, BBC, PBS, Wikipedia even. Careful with Wikipedia too, because that's crowdsourced information. That comes from you and me. So it's often accurate, but often not exactly. So you have to be careful with that. Anything you find on Wikipedia, make sure you find another source that can verify it, because you just can't guarantee that it's accurate. Even the site on this day. Whenever I write a birthday card, I pull up on this day and find out what happened on my friend's birthday to give them a little tidbit about their history, because they always seem to appreciate that. So it's fun to find out what happened in your birth year. Even if you look up, like if you go on eBay and search 1963 metal, for example, you'll get thousands of results. And right there, it'll give you a huge idea of what actually was minted in those times. And then you can look up the people who are commemorated. You can look up the events. It goes on and on. And the categories are really broad, and you really have to keep it narrow if you want to not lose control of your collection. But I would say I listed some of the most common categories to focus on. Famous births and deaths. That's a common one. There are millions of medals for centennials, sesquicentennials, semi-centennials, these jubilees, especially if you go to the county, city, state level, you'll find thousands, literally. It's unbelievable. Most of those are actually aluminum trade tokens. So that's not a category I focus on, but if you like that, you'll find endless supply of Jubilee medals that are trade tokens that are a lot of fun. It's fun if you look up your own state, your own county, your own city. Now, there are some of the big mints actually issued series that a lot of these were done as subscriptions, where they'll be like, oh, the 50 state medals, like the quarter system that you see today, where, you know, every month you'll get a different 1 or 5 or 10, and you'll subscribe to that and they'll come. Well, they did that way back in the day as well. And so you'll find these series, and if you look, you'll find some of them that are dated the year that you're looking for. So I have a number of series that I find very interesting. We'll get into that. And then there were huge events, like you have Olympics, you have giant trade expos, you have world fairs, you had political campaigns, and those sort of things. The sporting events, a lot of people focus just on sports, so there are endless categories. But for me, I chose large events, state or country events, not anything smaller, micro regional. And I'll get into the parameters more, but those are the things that I find interesting. Once I went through all the coins, it was pretty easy. Probably in a year, I found every coin that was minted with the year 1963 on it. Although I came across a couple later, I didn't realize. Here's an example. The country of Yemen in the Middle East. In 1963, it turns out Yemen was 2 different countries. It was North Yemen and South Yemen, and Yemen minted the coins in 1963 in both countries. I didn't know that. I found out, so I added to my collection later. And it's always fun to find those kind of surprises. Let's dig into it further there. But when we talk about parameters, so we don't usually get into this with specific goals. We like something, we buy it. We don't like it, we sell it, we trade, we have some fun. Maybe someone gave you a Blue Whitman book when you were a kid and you started filling in the pennies. Well, that's how we start. I was lucky to have a grandfather that, gave me 1 coin per birthday, and that got me interested in, for example, Carson City GSA silver dollars. Those are still fascinating to me. So, but when you really find what you love, maybe it's a specific country or a specific mint, then digging in and learning more about it and starting to fill the holes is really a lot of fun. But it's good to write up your ideas. I have a 1-page set of parameters that I use, and whenever I think, oh, that's really great, I should get that, and then I realize, well, it really doesn't meet the parameters, I'm going to skip it and use my budget for something else. That's helpful. Also, a lot of people don't think about budget, but maybe you want to allocate a certain amount of money every month, every year, or whatever, so you can keep, manage that. And then the biggest one, exit strategy. That's another thing collectors don't really think about at the time they get into their collection. But if you're lucky, you have a son or daughter, a niece or nephew, or someone in your family who's equally interested in collecting, and you can get them excited about it, and then that becomes your legacy with them, and you can pass it along. Because it's really sad. I know someone in Germany who has a wonderful Kennedy collection, and he's losing his eyesight, and it's starting to get difficult for him, but none of his family members are interested. He's got a whole room dedicated to his collection. So that's a tricky one. So you really want to plan ahead and think about that. I know we like to not think about it, but I think it's important to think about. For me, I found that a lot of the mints made the same commemorative metals in gold, silver, bronze, aluminum, any number of materials, and sometimes in multiple sizes within each composition. So I chose to focus on 50 millimeter or less in silver, although if it's not available in that case, I will break my rules. But that's the one I like to focus on. That's just me. It's, physical preferences. It's sort of a silly rule, but I like to display them in these books that I show you here in the photo. I like to go through them with my friends and family and talk about them, and it's a great way to show them off. I have a bunch that are also in graded and they're sealed, but they're a little trickier to go through. You can, of course, do books for those as well. They take up more space. But for me, I like ungraded coins and medals because they're easy to display this way. So that's kind of fun. Now, categories that you're going to exclude, I put that in bold because it really is equally important. Probably there are going to be more medals and coins that don't fit the categories you want that do. And so if you hold off on some of those categories, and if you run out of things to add to your collection, you could expand down the road. But for example, like I told you, if you decide to go for city level Jubilee medals, that's thousands right there. So you really have to think about that. Think about how you want to display and store them too. I mean, everybody has a system of some kind, but you want them to be secure, but you also want them to be, you want to be able to find them. So it's a good idea to actually catalog them too in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a card catalog or a spreadsheet like I use. If you catalog them, it's easier to categorize them, organize them, store them, and find them when you're looking for them. So I find that to be very handy. And one of the things I find is that a lot of the sites, even the numismatic sites, they don't share all the information I want. Like I like to know what minted that metal in what country and who actually designed the metal and the sculptor. I'm interested in those things, and if I collect that data, I add it to my spreadsheet. But there's just not a lot of data available for those kind of things. You really have to dig. But for me, that's part of the fun. I love the artistry of it. I love the math. I like the data. I like the geography. It's a wonderful study. I've learned so much about the world in the 1960s, and for me, that's invaluable. So organizing it all is just my anal retentive personality. Being an engineer, I like to have all those details. So collecting, storing, saving, managing, sharing, that's my favorite part of collecting. Let's move on. Okay, where can you find the coins and medals that you're looking for? Of course, I know you have resources. You may belong to clubs. You go to shows. You go to eBay or wherever you might go to find coins and medals. And there's some really interesting resources out there. eBay I found is the top resource because the world is using eBay. But not everybody does. The commissions are kind of high for the seller. So people are using more, they might even use Facebook Marketplace or OfferUp or any number of kind of local type of thing. But even Etsy, even Amazon, believe it or not, I met when you couldn't buy Cuban coins, I wanted to find a Cuban coin for my collection. And I found it on Amazon. I couldn't believe that. So you'd be surprised where you can find it. Vcoins is another one. MA Shops is one of my favorites. If you've never looked at it, take a look. It's European. I think it's Paris based, and a lot of the European coin shops belong to that and list through that, and you can buy through MA Shops from a lot of different shops and individual collectors all through Europe. And I found things there I can never find in the United States. It's really fantastic. In fact, they even have a coin concierge if you're really serious and you're looking for a very specific coin or metal at a specific grade with a specific date or mint mark. They will track it down for you as a service. So that's really nice. One of the things I started doing more recently was doing searches in foreign languages because I found that a number of foreign language sites have the coins and metals that I want that aren't available listed on US websites. So especially Spanish. Todo Colección and Mercado Libre are both great Spanish language sites. All the Spanish language countries have a subsite on Mercado Libre. So for example, the Mexican silver that I like so much, I find some on Mercado Libre Mexico website. Now, what's interesting about those sites is that you need a phone number with a local area code to be able to subscribe and buy. So you have to have friends in all those other countries, which makes it tricky, but it also gives you an advantage. The prices are lower when you're buying locally overseas in many cases. So that's an interesting opportunity. I just happen to have gone to an international business graduate school. So I use my alumni network to help me make those purchases and ship them up to me in the United States. Think about your network. That can be really useful when you're looking for international coins. So try, you can use Google to translate your English language search and put it into Spanish or put it into French or German or some other language and see what you get. You might not be able to read the results, but Google will let you translate that page. You can also click on the images button on Google and it will show you the results of your search with all the images. And you can often find those birth year coins and medals by the images, not just by the words. So that's something else to consider. You've got a lot of auction sites out there you're probably familiar with, Great Collection, Stacked Bowers. Many of those, if you're really looking for high-end coins and metals, that's where you're going to have to go. They're usually buying people's whole estates and auctioning off the estates. So you really have to know what you're doing there. And the more you do this, the more you search, the more you realize what the values are, the more you know what you're willing to pay for something. And that helps you when you start to compete against the world for those high-end coins and metals. But those sites are very valuable. Also, if you want to sell them, that if you want to reach a larger audience, it's more refined, has more money, is willing to pay more. Those are the kind of places you want to look. Coin clubs, collector websites, forums. I love that. I've met a lot of people through eBay who are either buying from me, selling to me, or collecting the same kind of thing I'm collecting. And we start corresponding and realize we have this in common. It's a lot of fun. I've met some very interesting people, and that's a nice way to go. Don't think of them as your competitors because they'll help you more than they work against you. And in many cases, I like to share leads of coins and metals that I find that I already have with the guys I know that are looking for the same thing. And they'll do the same for me. So that's a really, really nice way to find those kind of things. And your social media accounts, I mean, I don't know if you use social media, but if you use Instagram or TikTok or LinkedIn or any number of social media applications, you can ask your network, hey, here's a photo of what I'm looking for, and here's some details about it. Does anybody know where I might be able to find this? You'd be amazed. Your 200 connections might have 1,000 connections, who might have 100,000 connections, and pretty soon someone reaches back out with some information for you. So that's a great way to find things that you're looking for and to find people that you're looking for that like to do the same thing. So, and go to the coin show. It's a lot of fun. And for commemorative metals, it's tricky. I was in Atlanta. I had a lot of fun out there, but I didn't find a lot of folks with the kind of commemorative metals that I'm looking for. When I told them I'm looking for, I'm a 1963 birth year collector, most of them did a double take because that's not such a common kind of collection. And I think it's super interesting. And I think most of them did too. But it made them rethink the way they didn't know quite where to look for what they might have had. And they're like, here's 10,000 things you can look through. So that's what you end up having to do a lot of the time. But anyway, that's the case. It's all about people. It's all about the network. And you got to reach them through these sites, through in person, through the shows. These are great resources. Okay, let me take you through some of my 1963 collection. If you were alive at that time, you may or may not remember some of what went on, but it was a pretty lively year. This coin, this metal that you're seeing. Okay, let's talk about coins and metals for a second, because sometimes you can't even tell whether it's a coin or whether it's a commemorative metal, or in some cases it's both. I tend to define it by whether it's legal tender or not, because, for example, in 1963, Luxembourg had its 1100th anniversary, and they minted a commemorative coin that's really a non-circulating, it's not legal tender, but it does have a denomination on it, so it's a kind of a coin metal. This is a tricky category, so I'm not sure how to define them, but I want all of those. I think they're super interesting. So this one in particular, if anyone can guess it, I'll be very impressed if you can tell me where you think it's from. Let me jump into 1963. So the biggest event by far was the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And he was so beloved that there were many, many countries minted fabulous commemorative medals and coins with John F. Kennedy's picture on them. Now, for me, I want coins and medals that actually have the year 1963 on them. I don't want them only commemorating a 1963 person or place or event. So that's another parameter of my collection. I don't want necessarily a coin that's made today commemorating a 1963 thing, unless it says 1963 on it. I don't want it to have a newer date on it. That's just me. That's how I like to work with it. So most of the coins and medals that I have are from either 63 or immediately thereafter, showing the 63 event or birth or death. So Kennedy, there's some tremendous ones, and I love them. They're super interesting. One I'm showing you here actually shows him actually in his limo in Dallas as he's being shot. Now, one thing I didn't know, because again, I was born in 63, I wasn't there for it. I didn't know that Kennedy was not the only one who got shot that day. Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit went investigating Lee Harvey Oswald and was shot and killed by Oswald as well. So they commemorated Tippit on his own medal, which is also interesting, which I have pictured here. And then, of course, LBJ was inaugurated, so they have a few medals, a very small number, but a few medals for his inauguration. They did more when he was reelected later. But the medal you're seeing here in the upper right is super interesting. The U.S. had sort of poor relations with Mexico back in 1963, and John F. Kennedy went to the Mexican president and said, "Hey, what can the United States do to improve relations?" And Mexico said, well, there's this section of land called the Chamizal territory. The Rio Grande had a big flood and rerouted itself and cut a piece of Mexico off and put it on the US side of the river. And the US just sort of claimed that as territory. Well, Mexico didn't like that and they wanted it back. So Kennedy negotiated that and returned the Chamizal territory to Mexico. And he became a huge like a public figure in Mexico, so that Mexicans loved him and minted many medals. So this medal was for the return of the El Chamizal territory. Super, super interesting. By the way, in the upper right corner, you'll see the Kennedy World in Medallic Art. If you like John F. Kennedy, you can find this book on eBay for just a few dollars, and it's a great resource. It has a Kennedy cataloging system. You'll see I have K numbers here next to each medal. That's the cataloging system, and that book will go into that in detail, and it's very helpful in finding it. The most recent edition of that book was 2014, though, so everything newer than that is not going to have a catalog number. But if anyone's on the call that wants to explore that further, please contact me afterwards. That's a category I'm very, very interested in. Now, this is another one. We had a major death in 1963. Pope John XXIII died. Now, he died during what was called the Ecumenical Council II that went on for a couple of years. And the leaders of that council were Pope John XXIII and Paul VI. And you see in the lower left there, both of them were on the Vatican Council, running that council. And when John died, it only took 3 weeks for during the papal conclave for them to elect Paul VI as the new pope. So he was elected in 1963 as well. So you have medals for the death of John, medals for the election of Paul, and then you have many medals for the Ecumenical Council itself and the conclave where they were voting on the new pope. Super interesting. Those weren't minted in just Italy. They were minted in pretty much every Catholic country out there. So it's pretty fascinating, really nice category. They made beautiful medals for all of those occasions. Another thing that happened in 1963 was the centennial of the Civil War. It was in 1863, you had the Battle of Gettysburg, the Battle of Vicksburg, the Gettysburg Address. You had the transfer of command. You had a number of things related to the war that they commemorated the centennial of in 1963. And many of those were battle sites. And again, those were done on aluminum trade tokens. And that's a whole nother big category for that. But the Medallic Art Company did some really, really nice medals for Gettysburg and Vicksburg. And I like the heraldic art here, the Civil War centennial as well. So that's a fun one. You'll see that if you were born anywhere from 1961 to 65, you're going to see Civil War centennials medals issued. And that's a lot of fun category. Another thing that was going on in the early 60s was the space race, and wow, did they commemorate it. There are a tremendous number of medals. The US had the Mercury missions going on, and in fact, specifically, Gordon Cooper was on the Faith 7 flights in 1963, And then the Russians were they had what they called the rendezvous experiments with Valery Bykovsky, and then you had the first woman in space, Valentina Tereshkova, who was commemorated, and still to this day, many coins every 10 years, the Soviet rubles they issued with Valentina's picture on them. So that was a lot of fun. They're beautiful. You have them in every kind of metal, made with in Russian, made in the U.S., all through Europe. And really, even NASA minted many of its own, and they're just beautiful. They're fantastic. If you like the space theme, and you were born in the late 50s, early 60s, you'll find a lot of medals in that category, and that's a really fun category. And they're pretty scarce, actually, a lot of them. So, um, in fact, that makes it even more interesting to me. So I still have a bunch of holes in my 1963 space collection that I'm trying to fill. That's a fun one. Now, another thing that was going on in the early 60s was the civil rights movement. In 63, you had the March on Washington, which was tremendous. You had the murder of Medgar Evers in 1963 as well. Here's some interesting medals. I got the Lombardo Mint in Canada, did a peace medal that shows, if you look closely on it, it has the Pope, it has Kennedy, it has MLK Jr. That's an interesting medal. And you have the same folks there on the Peace and Justice Medal from the Royal Dutch Mint. That's actually I believe it was a 64 medal, but it shows the year 63, and I think it's beautiful. And the March on Washington itself, it was not commemorated as much in 63 as it was when MLK Jr. died in 68. Actually, Robert Kennedy and MLK died in 68, so there are a lot of medals again in that year that are related to the civil rights movement and the March on Washington and those deaths of those wonderful heroes. Now, another category that's one of my favorites, some of you may be familiar with this, Argenteus, or the Arius Magnus, which is Roman, which is, it's Latin, sorry. They're silver and gold bullion, really, if you will. And basically this designer, who was a painter, sculptor, and artist named Werner Groll, is a German. He wanted to offer up the world a new kind of currency that was based on the weight and size of gold. So you can see on the right side here, they're ducats. They're 10, 5, 2.5, and 1 ducat. And then over on the left, they did them in silver. Back in 1963, it was not legal to sell gold as bullion in the United States. And so they made silver versions. They called them Arius Magnus. They called them Argenteus, which is the ones you see on the left. So they made the same series. They minted these from the early 50s to the late 50s to the early 70s. And in the middle of the page here, you see an advertisement for these medals in the 1958 issue of the Numismatist magazine, which is really interesting. I was amazed when I found that. And if you can read the fine print, you can see that he was trying to promote. They sent samples of these to all the world mints and currency boards and presidents, saying, hey, here's a new way to do global currency. But none of the countries wanted to do it. They all wanted their unique identity. So they printed a few thousand, or they minted a few thousand of each of these, and then they went by the wayside. But the artistry and the images, they're beautiful. They're wonderful medals. They all have this kind of, it's not a fleur de lis, I forgot, a 6-point star, 6-point flower on the reverse, but the obverse, they're usually people, but they're really wonderful. In fact, they did in 63, they did one for Kennedy before his death, and they did another one for Kennedy after his death. So there are 2 different Kennedy versions from 63, but there were nine of these silver and gold ducats that were minted with the mark 1963. So I have 8 of those 9. I'm still looking for Nietzsche, if anybody knows where I could find one. That's a great category. A couple of them, you have in Venezuela, they made, I believe it's 8 different 20 millimeter gold and silver medals, a series on sort of the famous landscapes of Venezuela. They're really nice. They're hard to find. In fact, I can only find any reference to gold ones, even though I was able to buy a couple of the silver ones online. And finding those is quite difficult. You can find 1 or 2 here and there, but I'm trying to fill those holes. It's a really nice series. They're all sort of dime-sized but they're quite well done, and that's a pretty unusual series. And then in Mexico, they minted lots of metal. Mexico is a huge producer of silver and gold mines, and they have big mining conventions down there. So they were always looking for markets for their bullion, and they produced tons of gold and silver. And in the 60s, they were producing beautiful metals. But from 62 to 64 specifically, they minted a series called Monumentos Mexicanos, and they did 12 different monuments in 12 different states. And I've shown you two of them here, the state of Hidalgo and the state of Puebla, and their most famous monument in each of those states. So they have the state seal on the obverse, and then the monument on the reverse. And they're beautiful. They're really, really nice. And I have most of them, but I'm still trying to fill a couple holes. But that's just the tip of the iceberg for Mexican metals in the 60s. And again, Frank Grove, he produced this series of books, 3 different volumes of Mexican metals, and they're great, great resources. Hard to come by. If you can find them, you're going to pay a couple $100 a piece for them, but they're great resources if you like that category. And you won't find photos of all of them either. So I like the idea of photo documenting all of them and trying to put an online database together of all of those, because there's no such thing that I'm aware of. And I think that would be a great resource for collectors. Another mint that produced a really nice series through the 60s was Capital Metals, and they did what they call the State of the Union series. I think this was another subscription where you get a different one every month. And they did silver, bronze, and aluminum, and maybe even more than one kind of aluminum. And if I remember right, if you wanted the silver ones, you had to buy the whole set, but the other ones were available individually. And they're really nice if you can find them. People like to get the one from their own state. And a lot of the collections that were bought were broken up and sold off individually. So it's kind of hard to find all of them. But they're really interesting. They're nice. They're dated the year they were produced. And they usually show the capital of the state and the state seal on each one in most cases. But those are quite nice. So Capital Metal State of the Union series. Check my time here really quickly. All right, we're moving along. Now, the Medallic Art Company, many of you know it. It operated for something like 130 years in multiple locations and finally went out of business, I believe, right at the beginning of COVID. And now there's kind of a new interest and a renewed interest in those metals, and people are snapping them up because they're not going to make anymore. And they were famous for making award medals. For example, the Nobel Prize medals were made by the Medallic Art Companies. And they, Mako, as they're kind of referred to, the Mako Mint produced many different series, and they were all cataloged, and that's all available. But again, they were all often purchased as a whole series and then broken up in pieces. They did silver and bronze in more than one diameter, and they're really wonderful. The sculpting, I mean, it's beautiful. They're wonderful. They're mostly commemorating people, but not always, in many cases. And I have 4 different series that were minted with 1963 dates on them. The first one, New York University did a list of what they called the Hall of Fame of Great Americans. So they profiled all what they consider to be the greatest Americans. And the Mako Mint did a medal for each of the Hall of Fame Great Americans. They made a whole series with all of them. And they minted them for several years. So if you're born in the early 60s, you can find several of that series that were minted in your birth year. And that's a nice series. They did all of the US presidents as well. So you can find that through the early 60s as well. So I can't remember how many of the presidents, but several were done in 63. They made a medal for every signer of the Declaration of Independence. That's a series from Mako. It's a pretty good sized series as well. And then they also did one for every State of the Union. So with the most famous person from that state and the state seal. Those Mako medals are really nice. They're really attainable. They're not particularly expensive. A few individual ones can be quite coveted. You'll pay premiums for the rare ones, the ones people really love, the Abraham Lincolns and the Tom Sawyers and that sort of thing. But generally, they're pretty, especially in bronze, they're very attainable. Silver, they start to go up. And in fact, recently, as you know, all of that is climbing. So it's nice, long-term value too, plus really, really interesting. And it's fun to try to fill. They're a finite number of metals, so it's fun to try to fill that collection and try to complete that collection. So it's a really good exercise, interesting challenge. So I'm going to wrap it up with my last slide on some tips and tricks for your birth year collection. One of the things that eBay lets you do is put up a profile of yourself. I don't remember, it's 1,000 words or something like that. But if you list in your profile, hey, here's what I collect, here's what I'm looking for, these things are interesting to me, be very specific, you'll be amazed at how many people look at that and say, hey, I do that too, or hey, I have that collection that I'm trying to sell, or who knows what. So, get yourself out there, show people what you're looking for, and you'll find that you'll make friends and connections and find some good resources there that really helps you. I mentioned this already, translating your search prompts into different languages. We all like to share search prompts because, putting the word coin or putting the word metal doesn't really narrow things down very much. So the more words you can use to be more refined, the better results you're going to get. One of the things I found very early on was that Google search results are in words, and it's not visual enough and it's not specific enough for you to really figure out what you're seeing. And if you click the images tab and it comes up with every image from the pages of search results that you searched on, you'll be amazed at how many coins and metals you'll find there that meet your search parameters. And then clicking down deeper into the pyramid or the rabbit hole, you'll find more and more information. You'll find the site that's hosted that, or where it was bought, or where it was sold, or where it was minted, or any number of things like that. So, and it can be fun to, if you find something that nobody else has listed anywhere, it can be fun to add that to a list or a guide or catalog. Or even like Numista is another site I like, and you can go to a specific country, look through everything that was minted over the years, and see pictures. In many cases, it says, we don't have a photo. Do you upload it here? And that's nice. You can add your information to those directories, and that makes it easier for all the other collectors. Another thing about birth year collecting is 1963 only makes sense to people who use that the Christian calendar, the counting system from 1963. So many countries don't use that. For example, Japan. I lived in Japan for a couple of years back in the 80s, and on their coins, they use the year of the emperor's reign. How many years have they been reigning? So it might be the year 37 because the emperor's been reigning for 37 years. So you can't search on 1963 and find a Japanese coin or medal. It's not going to work for you unless it's some Western site that's already done that work for you. In some cases, you can find that, but find out how to write 1963 in Japanese and then do a search, and then you'll get more of what you're looking for. The Japanese, they have their own date year system. The Islamic calendar is different. They don't use 1963 either. So you can find it's easy to find a directory, a reference, a cross-reference guide for Islamic calendar with the Christian calendar. And then the Indian eras, in India and the countries around India also use a different numbering system. So you just need to know what you're looking for. And once you figure out how to write 1963 in those other languages, you can do those searches, you can dig deeper. Sometimes you're going to need some translation help. But this is where just in the last couple of years, ChatGPT and the AI agents in Google and the other search engines have become really, really smart, and that can help you tremendously with your translation. So I did most of my collecting before that was mainstream, and now I'm going back and correcting errors and filling holes because I'm finding the search tools are just so much more powerful. So take advantage of that, and go to your kids. They know how to use these tools. They're smart with the computer, and so they can help you. And if you don't have a ChatGPT subscription, I would encourage you to try to get one and experiment with it, because you'll be amazed just how powerful it is. One thing I found is that I didn't know in the early days what things were worth. How much should I be paying for a gold or silver medal or token or bullion or whatever I was looking for? And in many cases, it is related to the value of the intrinsic value of the metal, especially when you're buying gold. So I found that it was really helpful to understand, like, what is 14 karat gold? Oh, that's 53% gold. So, that makes a huge difference to its value. So I printed those charts and tried to memorize them on gold and silver purity chart, because the silver is rarely 100%. Actually, gold is rarely 100% either. It's just too soft. It's usually 90% or something less. So the value of those coins and metals is really related to the weight, and not just the weight, but the percentage of gold and silver. So it's helpful for your valuations to understand what the melt value is. Like if you melted that coin down, that should be your absolute minimum amount of value to that coin or metal. So then going up from there, you're going to get premiums over the melt value for the scarcity, and you're going to get another premium over the melt value for the condition or the grade. So those are huge factors. And it doesn't go up in a linear fashion. It goes up in an accelerating fashion. So as you know, the really high grade coins and metals are worth a tremendous amount more than the low grade ones. So those things are very helpful. Understand the grading system. If you're not really familiar with it, they're tremendous tools on the numismatic sites for you to really understand. If you've never graded your own metals and coins before, it's a great exercise to try to do that. Take a class through the ANA and read their guidelines, read the description of every grade, and then look at coins and metals, and you can learn pretty quickly how to narrow it down to a category of grades. That'll help you with the values a tremendous amount. Now, if you're doing silver and gold, you'll also find that a lot of them have hallmarks on them. These are stamps that were put by the mint into the metals. And if you can interpret those hallmarks, you can learn a lot about it. I found several of my metals were minted in places, especially in the UK, where they put great hallmarks in there. And if you don't know what those hallmarks are, you have no idea where that was made or by whom. So if you can find a hallmark guide, you can look up many of those common hallmarks and figure out those details. That'll give you a lot of information. Then it helps you with your search, and it might help you find what you're looking for. So those are all just tips, which I hope you'll find interesting. And if you have others to share, all of us collectors are interested in what everyone else is doing. So let's share them, let's collaborate, let's have some fun, and let's publish that stuff, because the data is out there. We just have to centralize it and get it into the right hands, right? So you can rely on me for that. I want to rely on you for that too. And let's dig into it. Let's make it easier for the collector. It's a lot of fun, very satisfying. You learn so much, and you put together a great collection, and it gives you many stories to tell. And when you meet another birth year collector, it's a lot of fun. You have a strong bond, and it's really enjoyable. So I hope you go forth with your birth year collection, and I hope you'll reach out to me. I put my name, number, and email here. Feel free to write it down. And I think we have it's quarter to noon Mountain Time here. So if you have some questions or comments that you'd like to add, I think Paula will moderate those for us. So I will turn it over to her, and I'll stop sharing my screen, and then let's talk some more.
Perfect. Right now there's a comment that's just funny, I think. So I think you said something about a budget. So this person says, what's the budget when talking about coin collecting? So yeah, I'm sure many people can sympathize with that.
Okay, I love that conversation. It's an interesting issue. People who like coins typically like money, and I was a card player for many years, and I'm also an investor, and I like the analysis of, well, how much should I put into any one thing? Where can I take some risk, and where can I not take some risk? For example, I like to let someone else handle 90% of my portfolio, but then I want to take the other 10% and take some risk with it and really have some fun. So I put coin collecting into that other 10% because I do look at it as an investment. So if you have a portfolio of assets, you might say, all right, I'm going to take 2% of my asset portfolio, and I'm going to allocate that to my coin and metal collection. I did that also when I played cards. I said, all right, I'm going to take 2% of that of my portfolio as an annual budget to investing in that. And interestingly, over the years that I played, my earnings were a perfect bell curve, like so many things in life. So then your budget changes as your earnings change, or as your assets change. So I like to tie what you're willing to invest to either your assets or your income, one or the other, and make it comfortable. You're going to also have to tie it probably to your spouse, who's going to have an issue with you if you decide to make it larger than they're comfortable doing. So maybe have that conversation, or you'll get yourself in trouble. But that's all I can say. I can't give you a dollar figure, but I would say somehow tie it to either your assets or your income.
Tracy says that was fascinating. Thank you so much. I'm going to give a few minutes here. I'm going to do a little wrap up and then I'll come back. So if anybody has questions, go ahead and pop them in there. I just wanted to thank you, Peter, for so much for this presentation. I did get to see it at the last show and I thought it was great. So I appreciate you doing it again for us here at NumismaTalks. And thank everybody at home for joining us. Our NumismaTalks are recorded and they will be up on our website once they're edited. And being that we're going to be gone for a week for the show, just know that it might take a little bit longer than it usually does. And then please check on our website at money.org. There's an education tab now, and you can find all of our future NumismaTalks and our past NumismaTalks. And you did say maybe take a grading class with the ANA. I will say we do have, if you are not aware, we are numismatic diploma program. My tongue got all twisted up there. Is out with 3 courses now, and one of them is grading. And so we use a lot of images and our Aristotle's vault to help teach that. So even if you can't get to something in person, at least it's something that could help if you're trying to grade your own coins and medals. And then we've got Diane saying, thank you both. A very interesting and informative presentation, all new information to me. I will say I do see a lot of topics, and you're the only person I've seen do this. I'm sure there are other people, but you're the only one that's come in front of me to do this. So I appreciate you, and I think it's interesting. I think I remember you saying at the show that if you're, and I don't know if I missed it or you said it and I just didn't catch it, that if you're on even birth year, you often will get an Olympics.
That's right.
Yeah. So I thought that grabbed my attention. That's just,
yeah, I missed the Olympics with my 63 and 64. They did it in Tokyo, but they also do many other games like the Pan American Games or the youth games, the university games, this sort of thing. But yeah, you're right. If you're born on an even numbered year, you have more of those big world events. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, Paula, thank you so much. I appreciate everyone's time and attention. Thanks for hosting and moderating, and I've enjoyed it. And I encourage you all to reach out, and I'm going to get in there and watch some of those as well. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Very good. You're most welcome.
Everybody have a good day.
Take care. Thanks a lot.